Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 3 of They Came From Below, a guide to playing Genestealer cults in Arks of Omen. I am your host, Tom, the very lowest of men, and I'm back once again to talk about the cults. I've actually had a couple of weekends off playing them, but I'm very excited to get back on it. So today, what I'm going to do is talk about key units you can use to maximize the power of a Genestealer cults list at the moment. I'm very interested in some of the more niche and underused units as well. I will unpack those in a subsequent episode, but today we're going to start with the raw power and some of the units you absolutely do want to be bringing if you want to get the best out of GSC on the tabletop. Structure is going to be as follows. Going to start with talking about Neophytes, surprising absolutely nobody. With each of these units, I'm going to unpack some of the things that make them good, some of the ways you can use them to be most effective. And so then I'll do the same for Atalan Jackals. I'll think about Acolytes, look at the Kellamorph, and finally my actual favorite, Purestrain Genestealers. So first and foremost, Neophytes. Neophytes are the all-stars of the GSC army right now. You can pack big 20 blob units with 4 heavy weapons, 4 special weapons, and an icon coming in at under 200 points and then slap additional upgrades on them. Coming in from reserves, a Neophyte blob does a terrifying amount of damage once you account for exposed and crossfire, right? +1 to hit, +1 to wound. Huge volume of shots without cover can put a massive dent in most targets. So you're going to use your Neophytes to do your heavy hitting. They're going to come down, they're going to blast key enemy targets, they're going to knock the enemy off objectives, going to lay down a lot of shooting, make it difficult for the enemy to recover, but then also provide the opponent with a very real challenge of 20 little bodies on the board, taking up space, using OBSEC to secure points, and score all of the GSC secondaries as well. Neophytes are brilliant with proficient planning upgrades. There's all sorts that go really well on a big slab of Neophytes. You could put lying in wait on them to come in 3 away, so a 20-man can sneak in behind the enemy and do huge amounts of damage. You could put from every angle on them to pop them up into strategic reserves and come down turn 1 to catch out the opponent on the edges of the board with your shooting. They also really benefit from a perfect ambush to give one unit crossfire and expose the first time it attacks anyway, to help make sure you're maximizing your threat and your damage across the board. So in general, Neophytes synergize massively well with the book, with the mechanics we were given in this particular edition of the game. I think it's fair to say that the 9th edition GSC book was very much a sales pitch for Neophytes and Atalan Jackals. In terms of actual weapons loadouts, the heavy weapons, I think the debate is fairly firmly down on the side of seismic cannons, right? Seismic cannons either give you a mass of shots at strength 4, AP 1, damage 1, or slightly less shots at strength 6, AP 2, damage 2. Once you've allowed for +1 to hit and +1 to wound, this is an enormous volume of fire. You can put huge amounts of damage into elite targets or chaff, and cause massive amounts of saves for even the most powerful and heavy hitting units, which means that they're going to take chip damage to the volume of shots as well. So I think seismic cannons are the most flexible and most useful. That 24-inch range does require some sensible playing around and setting up, but they are extremely versatile, able to put damage into most kinds of enemy units. I think at the moment you want to run them with shotguns as well. Strength 4, 2 shots, only 12-inch range, but it does mean that when you are in range, you're going to put an absolutely extraordinary volume of supporting chip damage on from the shotguns as well. So many enemy units will live through that first volley of special weapon, heavy weapon shooting, only to be brought down by a mass of shotgun shots as well. And it can, if you get ambitious, be used in a sort of split fire way to sink damage into different targets and bring down chaff with the smaller arms fire as well. In Arks of Omen, you get free special weapons, which is amazing. My personal favorite special weapon at the moment is the Weber, which is a very weird 18-inch gun, auto hits for D3, and then you're rolling against your opponent's strength, and if you beat it, you're doing mortal wounds. Now, with the volume of hits that you get, this is going to throw a few mortal wounds on an elite target, and it's going to absolutely gut low-strength things like elves, for example, from a safe distance. The 18-inch range means you can come down outside of deep strike screening or strategic scans or all-spec scans and still do significant damage, and it bypasses enemy defenses. So Webers are very useful, specifically at going after sort of infantry targets with particular protections. To be more flexible, you could take grenade launchers, which gives you both chaff shooting and anti-heavy shooting. Or you could take Flamers. I do really enjoy Flamers on a Neophyte squad just for the sheer volume of hits and attacks that you get with it. But at the moment, into the current meta, I think Webbers probably offer you the greatest flexibility, and they give you mortal wounds, which is actually something that a lot of these current GSC builds lack, because we don't build into the psychic strengths, which means we need to find our mortal wounds wherever we can. You want to take an icon, you can take an icon for 10 points on a GSC blob, and that's going to resurrect D6 of your squad every turn in the command phase. So the useful thing about this is that resurrection happens before you score your primary, so you can grow Neophytes back onto a point to either outnumber the enemy or to grow back onto a point they've shot you off of and keep your primary ticking over or catch the enemy out and score more points. It means that your opponent basically has to finish off Neophyte squads when they attack them. Otherwise, those special weapons and heavy weapons are going to start growing back and doing even more damage to the enemy. Neophyte blobs are a horrific tar pit, very heavy damage dealer, and contribute massively to our mission play with Brood Swarm and Ambush. You don't want to leave home without at least 60, I would say, in the current environment, but you do get more melee-focused builds that scale down to 40 or even 20 and focus on other things. Atalan Jackals. Well, Atalan Jackals are in many ways the sort of the anvil on which the rest of the army pivots. They are fast, they are durable with the right defenses and buffs, and they can hit hard as well. Pre-game move allows them to get about 23 inches up the board if you go first and there isn't enemy screening in the way, which can project threat, tie up the opponent, start putting pressure on really early, and force the opponent to come out and play in places they don't want to before your go turn is likely to drop in the turn after. If they're tooled up with demo charges and flamers, you can overcharge the weapons, give them damage 3 on the demo charges, damage 2 on the flamers. You can give them max 6 shots with a stratum on the demo charges, which once you've put rerolls on from the Nexus is an enormous amount of damage. Atalan Jackals automatically gain exposed against targets within 6 inches of the models that are attacking, which means that they are really good at punching through enemy armor and demolishing enemy chaff. And they're very, very effective at doing both of these things at once. They're surprisingly competent in melee these days because they all bring the Atalan power weapon, which is an industrial weapon, AP2 damage 1. They've got a few attacks each. And this means that you can chip away at enemy chaff in combat as you make your way up the board. You could spring reroll hits and reroll wounds against vehicles to get some attacks through enemy armor as well. And in general, they are just going to do that little bit more damage in combat now than they would have done before they got the sort of built-in special weapons. Much like the Neophytes, you can use regeneration tricks to keep your Atalan Jackals in the fight. It's quite good to sort of assign damage to the Atalan quads, soak up some of the enemy shots so that the unit isn't completely wiped out, and then use the regeneration of the Acolyte icon ward to bring bikers back, which means it's a real tar pit. And much like the Neophytes, if your opponent doesn't wipe squads out, they're going to have a real problem because you're going to just keep regrowing that capacity to do damage and keep on fighting. In general, the role of Atalan Jackals is to take up space. You could use fan out and be very aggressive turn 1 by putting like 2 or 3 big squads of them out across the opponent's objective so they simply can't get out. You can use them to sort of sneak into promising positions and hold ground while you wait for the rest of your army to arrive. If your opponent's very offensive, you can also use them as blips in much the same way and counterpunch with them, using that 14-inch move to strike out surprisingly far from your own lines and take advantage of any misplays the opponent has made turn 1. So they're very flexible. All-stars, really. Like I say, I've been running 20 for a while, and 20's been great, but a lot of the very most successful lists run 30. That's how good they are, and they very much allow the rest of the army to get to work by causing an enormous amount of disruption as it does so. Okay, next up, Acolytes. Acolytes are not quite the workhorse of the army that they used to be. They're still useful. They're OBSEC melee, which is nice to have. And those little 5-mans are particularly good for shoring up secondary scoring. It's very hard to stop a 5-man Acolyte squad that can come in up to 6 away from dropping in to do things like RBD, tick off secondaries, land in the right places, help tee up crossfire, all of that good stuff. They're very hard to stop, very hard to screen. To add to the utility, you could kit them out with hand flamers, so you can put some crossfire tokens on things. You only need a handful of hits from the hand flames to get crossfire tokens. It also obviously definitely hurts things like elves and guardsmen, demons, more fragile stuff if you can get crossfire off. And you could also tool them up to steal objectives, right? You could have a trap sprung, the proficient planning upgrade, to get a 3d6 charge on a larger squad of acolytes. You sometimes see squads of 15 applied in this way. I like to use 10. And if you tool these up with industrial weapons like the rock drill or rock cutter, or cheaper now, rock saw, then you can use these as harassment and objective theft to keep your opponent's primary down. It's really nice to have at least one trap sprung unit in your army to put that pressure on and force the opponent to go on the defensive in their home field somewhere. Acolytes with their obsec are particularly good at threatening their actual primary scoring whilst doing this. The thing with acolytes is that they die hard. You don't usually have enough of them in a squad to keep them around. The 15s may be a little bit different, but in the main, I find acolytes are a one and done, right? They'll go in, they'll do their thing, and then they tend to get killed off unless they're protected very carefully with your positioning and where they're fighting on the board. Nonetheless, they're really useful. You always want at least a couple of little squads, possibly a larger combat squad, and they do a lot of work for the army as the shooting gets it done around the board. Okay, this is a fan favorite, the Kellamorph, the cowboy, the gunslinger. The Kellamorph is just so worth it at 80 points as a general harassment and all-round utility combat and shooting piece. He's a fire and fade harassment unit, right? He can jump out, shoot, and jump back. He gets to fire and fade in the same turn, which means if you can find a nice wall, he can be dropping down, shooting, and hiding, ready to do it again unless the opponent comes to deal with him. And in GSC, anything that makes the opponent come to places they don't want to be is great because it helps us get around them, helps us do damage to them. You can tool him up with the Wormtooth rounds, and this is generally great, right? You either get 3 shots, AP 3, Strength 6, Damage 3, or a bunch of smaller shots, Strength 5, AP 1, Damage 1 that trigger off mortal wounds. Kellamorph gets extra shots for successful hits, so this really slaps on damage, can really hurt elite armor units or chaff. And with the mortal wounds, you can always bank on doing a little bit of chip damage to even the largest of targets. The Kellamorph is brilliant for teeing up an additional crossfire token or exposed if you need it on something, but can also just go for the knockout blow on something as well. I find that at certain stages in the game or in certain matchups, the free movement the Kellamorph can use after shooting can also be very good for clutch plays on objectives. Things like sort of scuttling out of reserves, shooting, and then booping onto an objective to shut down enemy primary if they've only got a transport or one unit on it can be really big. So the Kellamorph is excellent offensively too, but you need to identify the matchups in which it's better to throw the Kellamorph away and the ones in which you're going to get more use by staging it defensively in ruins near your home objectives and just recycling, jumping out, shooting, jumping back. Finally, one of my favorite stratagems in the GSC book is a Glorious Demise, which is the Kellamorph's shoot on death stratagem. So every now and again, you'll have an enemy unit that you just need to clear. Harlequins, I remember, has always been one where sometimes the thing to do is to send the Kellamorph in, shoot, move, charge into something, get killed, shoot yet again to throw even more shooting onto an enemy unit and really maximize a particular turn's damage from the shooting. So the shoot on death can catch people out. It's very good for ensuring that the Kellamorph takes whoever comes to kill him with him. And although it's expensive CP investment, there are going to be moments where the shoot on death can be really clutch and can sort of really break an opponent's morale. Okay, finally for today, we have Purestrain Genestealers. Now, Purestrains are brilliant. They are all-stars. They are all-rounders. They're relatively durable. They're very fast, and they have good attacks. The most common way to use Purestrain Genestealers, literally since the book came out, is to combo them with They Came From Below, which gives you a pre-game move, to throw a unit of 10 Genestealers into the enemy lines good and early, to kill and eliminate an enemy unit, which helps you score ambush, helps you push the enemy back, and generally helps you on the offensive as well. It's very hard to stop this. It's got a threat range of something like 22 inches, not at all easy for the opponent to stop, and it's a really useful tool to combo with the forward pressure of the bikes and the dropping in of the Neophytes. In general, Genestealers have a very nice damage profile with high volume AP3 attacks at strength 4, good into a wide range of targets. You don't lose any efficiency into things like Transhuman, Dark Angels, Terminators, for example, which is very nice. And it really threatens any kind of lighter unit with the sheer volume of attacks that they put out. 4-up in run is quite surprising in an army that falls over whenever it's shot a lot of the time. And people often get caught out by how surprisingly durable a 10-man of Genestealers can be. It actually takes a little bit more effort to remove, and that can sometimes distract and slow the enemy down. The way I tend to like to use Purestrains is in a sort of constantly recycled fashion, right? I like to send them out, kill something, use Return to Shadows, go back into reserves, pop down the next turn, stage somewhere nice in the midboard, and then go out and do it again the turn after. And if you have multiple units of Genestealers, you can actually just keep doing this across the game, like 1-2, 1-2, which is extremely fun to do. Purestrains offer you Incision, they offer you Speed, they combo really nicely with They Came From Below, and in the main, they just give you something to keep the opponent honest. We're quite a gunliney, shooty build. It's nice to have something that if the opponent does get into you, you can counter-punch with and counter-push with. So that is it for today. Thank you very much for listening. There's a ton more content, GSC-related content on the 6++ Gaming channel, and a whole bunch of other faction-specific stuff and podcast episodes you guys can check out as well. I will be returning to GSC content quite regularly over the next couple of weeks, and I will be looking at some of the lesser used but still valid and interesting units you can explore. I'll be thinking about how to tool up and exploit using our characters, and I will also be looking at the particular traits and builds that are out there in the world at the moment and start to examine how and why they're doing so well. Genuinely is a heyday for Genestealer cults out there. They're taking a lot of names, doing very well indeed. Get out there and make the most of it. And let me know what units you've been using and how you found them. Very curious to hear about it. Thanks very much. Lowest of Men.